Welcome to Inc.'s The Founders Project with Alexa Von Tobel. I'm Alexa, the founder of LearnVest, author of New York Times bestselling book, Financially Fearless, and second book, Financially Forward. I'm also the founder and managing partner of Inspired Capital, a venture firm focused on the entrepreneurs of the future. Each week, we sit down with a top founder to share their story of guts, inspiration, and drive. Hi, everybody. I'm Alexa Von Tobel, your host. This week, I'm excited for you to meet Kurt House, the co-founder and CEO of KoBold Metals, an AI-driven mineral exploration company. KoBold's mission is to accelerate discovery of critical materials needed for the energy transition. KoBold Metals combines leading mineral explorers with an outstanding team of data scientists and software engineers hailing from Apple, Google, and other Silicon Valley companies. In the 4 years since its founding, KoBold has built a portfolio of over 50 projects on 3 continents and has developed lasting partnerships such as BHP and Rio Tinto. Throughout his career, Kurt has been an entrepreneur at the interface of technology and natural resources. He previously founded a carbon sequestration company and his enhanced oil recovery business, as well as the direct investment platform to acquire North American natural assets. Kurt has been an adjunct professor at Stanford University's Energy Resource Engineering Department. Previously, he's a research fellow at MIT, where he studied chemistry and physics of CH2 kappa and storage. He received his Ph.D. from Harvard University for his work in applied math and earth science, and his BA in physics from Claremont Colleges. Kurt has also worked in private equity and corporate advising for Bain & Company. And with that, let's welcome Kurt. Kurt, first of all, I'm so excited to have you here. Let's go to the beginning. How'd you end up coming up with this idea?
So the idea came out of a series of conversations that I had with my co-founders, and principally Josh Goldman, the current president of the company. We actually known each other for years. We went to grad school together, and a couple independent things sort of catalyzed. One was, so this was really 2017 when the brainstorming started in earnest. One was we decided we definitely wanted to fully divest ourselves from fossil fuel work entirely. We wanted to work exclusively on things that contributed to the solution and not to the problem. Thing two, we saw the EV revolution coming together. There were several watersheds in the mid-teens that made it clear that this was coming. It's obviously a necessary but insufficient condition for addressing climate change and fully transitioning the energy economy from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable and electrified economy. There were clear signals. This was happening faster than a lot of people were expecting. It does not take a lot of brain power to go from there to we're going to need a huge amount of very specific key materials that are very difficult to substitute, do things really well because of their physical properties. And so we just started doing some arithmetic and basically like, oh, actually, the critical material shortfall is going to restrict the pace of electric vehicle adoptions and rollout. So that was the main catalyst. The second, there's an independent axis to this. The independent dimension is, what if the incumbent industry is just good at this? What if they're just going to accelerate discoveries and supply all the material needed? The interesting thing is that the incumbent industry at the time, and it's still mostly the case, isn't even trying, actually. So unlike the oil and gas industry that's largely vertically integrated, so the major oil and gas players do everything from very original exploration and project generation development all the way through operations and even retail sales. The metals and mining business has, over the last generation, has largely vertically disintegrated. So the major mining houses of the world are mostly construction and operations firms. They mostly play at the end of the value chain, and they've outsourced exploration to a very, very long tail of very small prospecting firms, generally known as the mining juniors. These companies tend to be very poorly capitalized and kind of focusing on trying to get one particular project through some stage gates. They're basically project developers or prospecting firms. None of those entities are investing in new technologies and new techniques to improve the efficacy and the efficiency of the exploration process to accelerate discovery. None of them are. They're not even trying. This is a problem and therefore an enormous opportunity, and we need to jump in with both feet.
Can you walk us through exactly what KoBold does?
Yeah. So the mineral exploration industry, right, what is it trying to do? It's trying to find locations in the Earth's crust where there's anomalously high concentrations of particular elements. right? So right underneath your feet right now, Alexa, there is gold, there's uranium, there's lithium, there's cobalt, there's everything you can imagine right underneath your feet. But it's all in very low concentrations. So it would be uneconomic to mine or develop. But in certain places, nature has done the hard work through very selective and specific sets of chemical reactions. They've concentrated certain elements into enormously high concentrations relative to background. So that's the goal of mineral exploration, and has been for really thousands of years, is finding those places with anomalously high concentrations. The industry today is still very much in the paper map and yellow pages world, right? Where they are sort of just manually, in a bespoke way, kind of hunting and pecking around. And what we're trying to do is take all of the information that humans have collected about the physics and the chemistry of the Earth's crust for hundreds, even thousands of years, aggregate it all, structure it all in a way that is universally interrogatable by humans and by algorithms, right? And make it all at the scientists' fingertips, so that they can systematically move around the Earth's crust and systematically look at the composition of the Earth's crust everywhere from continent to continent. And the end goal would be that it would be as fluid as your Google Maps app, which just tells you exactly where every street is and every house is and every retail establishment is.
So, Kurt, I want to break this down into like simple terms that everybody listening can really understand. How do you do that? And I know you have a product, TerraShed SM. Walk us through this comprehensive data system. Give us a sense of how it works.
Yeah. Here's a simple one. So the Earth's gravitational field actually is not the same as you move around the surface of the Earth. And it's not the same for two different reasons. One, your elevation changes. If you go to the top of the Mount Everest, it's going to be different than in the bottom of Death Valley, right? It depends on how much mass is between you and the center of the Earth, right? That's thing one. And thing two, the material itself differs in density. It's an indirect measure, but it tells you something. It tells you something about the distribution of the density of the Earth's crust. But we have to adjust for elevation. So first we have a map. We have a very accurate map of the topology of the Earth's surface. That's easy, because it's not easy, but it's relatively easy. And then humans have made measurements of the Earth's gravitational field all over the place, from satellites, from airplanes, from handheld devices. They've done this for decades, actually. But all these measurements have been made. What we are doing is we're aggregating all of those old measurements, because they're almost always in the public domain, which I can explain. We aggregate all those measurements. We adjust for technology type, vintage, etc. And they have different sort of error bars. And then we can come up with a more holistic view of where the gravitational anomalies are. Right. And that tells you something. It doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you something. It tells you, oh, this is interesting. We have these weird density anomalies in these locations. Now let's take it one step deeper. Imagine for a moment, just imagine, to make it really simple, you're in space. So there's nothing else around you. You're measuring a force of gravity, and there's a small object close to you. There's nothing else. Now I just take that small object, I move it further from you, and I make it bigger. I can tweak the distance and the relative sizes of those such that the gravitational force that's pulling on you or on your instrument at that location is exactly the same. The two different objects, but different sizes and different distances, are giving the exact same measurement. That's a problem, right? That means that every time you make a gravitational measurement, you have this non-uniqueness problem. So we take that, and we've invented a whole new class of technology we call stochastic inversions. It's a bunch of techies to speak, but what it means is we can take all those measurements, and we know that there's a large number of valid solutions. I mean, there's a large number of density distributions that do replicate the measurement, and there's a much larger class of density distributions that don't replicate the measurement. We can actually determine all of those. So we can dramatically narrow the search space. We can say, yes, there's a huge number of possible solutions here, but we know what the possible solutions are, and we know what the impossible solutions are. And that's a technology that actually only KoBold has. The industry standard technology is somebody just kind of uses their best guess and comes up with one answer. And that's actually doesn't make any sense because there are thousands and thousands of valid and discrete possible solutions. And it's really important that you represent all of them.
Okay, I want to go and talk a little bit about your team. So one of the things I love about your approach, 2/3 of your team come from tech and data background. And then 1/3 of the team is experienced explorers. First of all, what the heck is an experienced explorer? Like, what does that mean? And then how does that outside perspective of having the explorers on the team help you guys make better decisions?
The experienced explorers, these are people who have spent their careers working in the mineral exploration business. They're the best in the world at what they do. We've managed to hire people that have made some of the most significant copper, nickel, zinc discoveries of the last generation. The heart and soul of the company are the experienced explorers, and then we augment them with the best and brightest out of Silicon Valley and elsewhere. One thing that KoBold does that is kind of almost a central dogma at the company is experienced explorers do not lead exploration projects. Exploration projects are co-led by one data scientist and one experienced explorationist. KoBold, what we try to say is we try to keep the language, we're all explorationists. We're all just explorationists. That's our business model. Our business model, we do not sell our services. We do not sell insights. We do not open up our platform for other users. We invent technology and then we deploy that technology for our own book to make discoveries. Either we eat what we kill. We either make discoveries or we don't succeed as a company. Co-leading exploration teams, the data scientists and geoscientists, is actually quite a radical thing. I would say basically every major industrial company in the world, far beyond metals and mining, they all have some kind of data analytics, data science initiative or movement. Almost exclusively, they are a different team, right? They are sort of, that's the data analytics team, that's the data science team, and they're supposed to do something sort of in parallel with the conventional approaches and techniques. And we fully sort of reject that concept. Data scientists have to be making exploration decisions. They have to be there with the geoscientist making exploration decisions. The problems we're working on are so hard. They're so much harder than a typical kind of consumer product company. We absolutely cannot rely on a sort of layer of product managers sort of going in between, data team and geoscience team, like explaining features or something like that. Just doesn't make any sense. So the people inventing those technologies have to be actually making those decisions. That's our view.
What's obvious to you? I would love to get a sense of your predictions of what's coming. I'd love to get a sense of the future of climate tech from your point of view.
Oh, that's a great question. One of the most significant technological revolutions of our lifetimes is the solar cost curve. There's good papers on this to show how much the cost curve, what actually transpired in the teens, how rapidly the cost of solar came down. And it blew away basically every single most optimistic forecast. It had a combined annual growth rate of about 15% from 2010 to 2020, something like that, which for industrial deployment is insane. It's a staggering kind of growth. It's grown 100-fold. What's really come into focus, I think, over the last decade, and is that we know how to solve climate change now. Climate change really is about electrifying the economy. It's about converting everything you do to some original electrified source and then having a fully renewable grid. That was not that obvious in the aughts because the cost of renewable energy was so expensive. I spent many, many years of my life working on a technology called carbon capture and sequestration, which will use fossil fuels, use like coal and natural gas, but capture the CO2 from the smokestacks, inject it underground. Because 15 years ago, I certainly thought it was the case that would had a good chance of being cheaper because fossil fuels were so much cheaper than renewables 15 years ago.
Yep.
That it would still be cheaper to capture the CO2 from a fossil fuel power plant than it would be to build renewables. That seemed like a reasonable forecast. Is one I bet totally wrong. I was wrong. That forecast was wrong. So this is really good news. Deploy renewables is the right answer. Oddly, there's actually been a bit of a resurgence in carbon removal and these types of ideas. I think it's a giant red herring. I think it only exists because of some ill-conceived government subsidies. The things that really happen is renewable deployment, continued solar deployment. People ask me, like, what can I do for climate change? You should absolutely buy an electric vehicle. If you live in the right area, particularly residential area, you should do rooftop solar.
Our grid right now, our grid for the country, how on earth are we going to get the grid for the country up to speed for electrification?
In some ways, the outlook here is probably better than people think, and in some ways, it's worse. So it's better in the following sense. Coal plants are going to are continue to go offline, and they're all going offline basically in this decade, and that's a wonderful thing. That's a fantastic thing. That is opening up a lot of transmission and a lot of industrial sites that people are smart developers are just taking those old coal sites and turning them into battery connection sites or interconnections for renewables, et cetera. So we have a lot of growth potential just in that replacement, and people should just continue to do that, and that's very, very good. Technologically, I don't think the grid needs massive upgrades like you sometimes read. The grid is actually a pretty sophisticated device. The key solution is just getting more intermittent, more storage type devices on it. Now, the place where I'm pessimistic is we do need new transmission built, particularly because there are some very windy areas, very sunny areas that don't yet have good transmission lines to the major load centers. And this is not a tech problem. This is just a political will and NIMBY problem, is that permitting these things is grotesquely difficult. And that's a major problem. Actually, conventional environmental movement, that sort of environmental movement that arose out of the 1960s, but that movement was really built on stop, right? Stop building. But we have a new set of problems now, right? And the new set of problems is we need to build a lot because we need to replace the entire fossil fuel infrastructure. We need to do that in the next 30 years. It really needs to be a massive yes in my backyard kind of for industrial development attitude toward permitting of new sites and particularly transmission lines.
Is this going to happen as quickly as we need it to?
I believe we will avert a sort of catastrophe. And there's a variety of reasons I think that's true. What I do not think we will achieve various proclamations of mid-century decarbonization, net zero by 2050, or I think there's too much momentum in the system. 18% EV market share is fantastic. That still means over 4 out of 5 cars being bought today are gasoline or diesel cars that are going to be on the roads for 20 to 25 years, right? We still add a lot more gasoline infrastructure to the world economy every year than we do EV infrastructure to the world. The pace is slower than I think it needs to be for mid-century decarbonization. I think it's accelerating. The reason we started KoBold is we were looking around at all the things to the energy transition, and we thought access to key materials would be a governor on the rate, and we're already seeing that. We're seeing that in commodity prices to some extent, but even more so if you spend time with auto OEM execs and ask them, F-Ford 150 Lightning, the F-150 Lightning, right? There's like a 3-year waiting list for that. Well, why not buy more? Why not make more cars, right? Like, why there's so much demand? Why not increase supply? And they are increasing supply, but if you talk to them, they'll say, well, the issue is we need to buy X batteries by Y, this many years ahead, and the battery suppliers won't supply as many as we need. And you go to the battery suppliers, you ask them, why is that? Why won't you sell them more? Well, we won't sell them more because we can't get enough cathode precursor material, enough anode precursor material. Okay, go to the refiners, ask them, why is that? Why are you not supplying the battery makers with everything that they're asking for? And they say, well, because the mines aren't supplying us with as much raw materials. So it's already happening that the rate of adoption is being governed by the slow rate of new mine construction and development. And so
it's KoBold.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to accelerate that process as much as we can by getting the best possible projects into the queue as soon as possible.
And we'll be right back after a message from our sponsors. Kurt, I want to transition a little bit to you. You are a Ph.D. from Harvard in Earth and Planetary Sciences. In plain English, what the hell does that mean?
That's a good question. It's basically physics at the Earth scale. So physics at like the kilometer scale. So I was a physics and philosophy major in undergrad, and then really wanted to work on energy problems. And energy is first and foremost about infrastructure. Second, it's about natural resources. And third, it's about technology. And technology is kind of a distant third. Natural resources and infrastructure are significantly more important. The motivation to go to Earth and Planetary Science department, also sort of a geoscience department, is to think about the Earth's resources on a global scale and think about the physics and chemistry of how they assemble, what puts them together, how humans utilize them, and then how new technology can make their utilization more effective. My doctoral studies was on the physics and chemistry of CO2 sequestration, like I talked about earlier. That's where I spent a lot of time. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how CO2 migrate. If you were to pump billions of tons of CO2 underground to keep it out of the atmosphere, how would that react with rocks in the subsurface? How would it flow? Would it find pathways to the surface and escape?
We've had many PhD turned entrepreneur CEOs. How do you think academics has changed or impacted your style of entrepreneurship?
KoBold is very much at the interface of fundamental research and deployment of that technology. When we started KoBold, I was adjunct. A lot of the original ideas, not so much the motivation, but the original ideas of what we'd actually do to improve the efficacy of the mineral exploration search problem, came out of brainstorming sessions with a man named Jeff Cares, Professor Jeff Cares at Stanford. That relationship has flourished. We continue to support a whole bunch of researchers in his lab. And actually, we started an initiative together. It's called Mineral X. I encourage everyone to Google it. We're having a launch symposium next week. This will probably air after it, though. It's a really cool industry academic collaboration where we're working on all kinds of fundamental questions of how do we quantify uncertainty and make statistically rigorous predictions about things we can't see, and incorporating all of the various types of indirect evidence. And in fact, there's a paper that we published, and it's called Efficacy of Information in Mineral Exploration. Within 9 months, we had used the insights from that paper in the field to target and discover large quantities of nickel and cobalt.
I read this great line about KoBold that says, KoBold is going to fail more than it will succeed, but that you can still be an incredibly successful company, even with that failure. Talk a little bit about just how you mentally wrap your head around that and getting through failure.
So the first is the unit economics of mineral exploration are superb. This is, and there's no secret here. This is where the word eureka comes from. If you make a discovery, you make a lot of money, right? You can make 5,000 times your money by discovering a large new deposit of something. That's been known forever. This is why like gold mines are like an analogy for wealth, springs and things like that, right? So what's the problem? Why isn't exploration a good business to just invest in? Well, it's not a good business to invest in because the success rate sucks, right? And the industry average success rate is well less than 1%. We think it's probably about 1 in 200, something like that. So maybe half a percent. So constantly fail. So if you invested in every exploration project, you'd kind of break even, basically. KoBold's entire business proposition is that we're going to use data much more effectively and invent new technologies and new techniques to improve that success rate. In rough numbers, our goal is about 1 in 5. So to go from 1 in 100, 1 in 200, down to 1 in 5. If we succeed in that goal of having 20% exploration success rate, we will create gobs of value for our investors and for the world. That's just very basic arithmetic. The question is, do we succeed? And we won't know for many years if we can hit that success rate, although we are on track. But that also means that we fail 4 out of 5 times, right? So wild, out of control success, grand slam kind of success, we are still failing 80% of the time. So failure is absolutely built into our business. And it's something that we celebrate because we really, really weaponize the concept of failing fast, right? Because for us, marginal data is expensive. Marginal efforts are expensive. The opportunity cost of our people and our time is hugely expensive. So when we go out, when we have a new exploration hypothesis, the whole culture that we try to create around this is, okay, go falsify it. If anyone says, I'm looking for here's my confirming evidence, right? We say, I don't want you looking for confirming evidence. I want you to falsify your hypothesis.
I love it.
I want you to lay out the hypothesis and then say, what evidence can you find that is perfectly inconsistent with this? And then go find that evidence. And when you find that, high fives all around. Celebrate, champagne, nailed it. Just last month, one of our geologists in Canada, a woman named Lucy, had an exploration hypothesis, staked a property, went on the property, had a very specific falsification criteria that she was looking for, found it, and condemned the project, all within about 3 weeks, and for basically $0, basically just whatever her salary, maybe in a plane ticket or something, effectively $0. And we made a big deal out of it, major celebration. That is weaponizing failing fast, right? And then you institutionalize the learning. You've increased your data set, your training set with good, true negatives, which you need true negatives in your training set. And we move on to the next one.
I'm going to transition to the quick fire round. Number one, what interview questions do you love to ask when you're trying to get to know somebody?
I love to ask where people grew up. I like to know life story. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer, right? I love anything that gets at curiosity. I think it's the strongest single indicator of success. If I can find someone with burning curiosity, just a drive to learn for the sake of learning. So certainly questions about books that they've read and things like that are helpful. You can definitely tell a prepared answer from a better answer when you ask those types of questions.
I love that, Kurt. And on that note, what's a book that you've read that's changed your life of any kind?
Best book I've read recently is a book called The Knowledge Machine by Michael Strevens, a New York University professor of the philosophy of science. He cracks what's called the demarcation problem for the first time in the history of philosophy of science, which is what is science and how do you distinguish science from everything else, from non-science. Strongly recommend that book.
What is your biggest pinch me moment to date since running KoBold?
We made a major discovery in Zambia about a year ago. I was in Zambia recently, and I was at our site, which is very remote, looking at the core that we had drilled, and it was some very high grade copper and cobalt. And there's one chunk of the core that was sort of exceptionally high grade. It was basically almost pure copper sulfide. So I was holding a chunk in my hand that was almost 50% copper by mass, which is not representative of the full thing, but it was just this one incredibly dense nugget of copper that was naturally formed in the ground. And it was just wow. And it was a 1.5 kilometers deep, incredibly difficult to detect. And we predicted where it would be inside we predicted where the full core would be, and we were pretty much spot on. And that was a pinch me moment.
A quote you live by, a quote that you love.
It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out where the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. Credit goes to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually strives to do the deeds, spends their life, knows the great enthusiasms, knows the great devotions, and spends their life in a worthy cause, and who in the end, if they succeed, know the triumph of high achievement. But if they fail, at least they fail while daring greatly, such that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat.
Last question. If there's one thing that you're excited about for the future, what is it?
For KoBold specifically, we have made a major copper cobalt discovery. I think we're on the verge of a major nickel discovery and a major lithium discovery. We'll see. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. If things continue apace, there will be a time when there will be a new nickel mine, a new lithium mine, and a new copper mine producing copper, producing lithium, producing nickel, producing cobalt, all going into the EV supply chain. And that could happen within this decade, potentially. That will be a moment when we know our efforts will have been worthwhile.
Kurt, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. What an incredible human and soul you are. And thank you so much for what you're doing for our planet. I'm so grateful to be a friend and tiny investor. Most importantly, everybody out there, please check out KoBoldMetals.com to learn more. And you can join us next week for Inc. the Founders Project with Alexa von Tobel. Kurt, we're rooting for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here and love that you're on the cap table.